Okay, good afternoon, class, and welcome back to Science 910. Last week we talked about the environmental concerns we have in Canada and in the world, some major environmental concerns, things like deforestation, like pollution, resource depletion. And in Canada, I think some of you or whoever, some of them home support students have written back. We do have some major concerns in Canada, and one of them, of course, is what's happening to our forest. A lot of things happening across Canada. A lot of clear cutting has made it difficult for our forest to replenish. If you notice right here in Bathurst, we don't have a pulp and paper mill here anymore. Well, that happens all over New Brunswick. There's a lot of mills from Atholville, Dalhousie, here in Bathurst, Miramichi. They're all shut down. The woods, they haven't been able to keep up with the cutting. Irving is probably one of the few people who's actually got into a habit of replanting trees, and so that after 25 years he has another harvest that he could cut. So a lot of the companies didn't do that. So today we're going to look at in science, just starting with some basics of things we have to know about when we look at the environment. Some basic words: ecotones and biodiversity, and some major threats to biodiversity. Well, the word bio, right now you know, something to do with biology, which is living things. So we're looking at living things in the environment, but we also have to look at the non-living things. The non-living things like the air we breathe, the sunlight, the soil. Those are all things we need to live. And there are factors in the biodiversity as well. Diversity is a word that means difference. All the different things, okay? We're not all one thing. If we're all one thing, we'd be called clones. It'd be a very boring life. There wouldn't be differences, right? All the same animal, the same plants. It would be pretty boring. So we're going to look at how these things interact, and then there is a little short video, and then I'll get you to answer questions in assignment 4. So, what is a pest? Well, if you look at some of the pictures there, you can see a common one, besides the flies that keep bugging me in this classroom, but the mosquitoes. Of course, rats are a major problem for a lot of people. Pests. This is a carpet beetle. These are moths. Here's some plants: dandelions. There's a honeybee. There's a rabbit. And here's some crabgrass. Now, some of you would know that some of those things are problems. Here, crabgrass. Rabbits, not so much a problem here, but what happened was in Australia, someone brought a rabbits in there a long time ago from England, and you know how rabbits reproduce. They got so many, there was nothing that would kill a rabbit. Here we have foxes, but they didn't have any foxes down there, so they had to bring foxes into the country so they could control it. So what we call pest for humans, for a lot of animals, it's food. Okay? So a lot of these things we don't realize, like rats are eaten by birds like owls and hawks, and even deer. Dandelions, deer eat dandelion. Even humans will eat the dandelion leaves. You know, there's a lot of animals that eat parts of the dandelion. So and rabbits, of course, are eaten by things like foxes. Also, we know that these things provide food for other living organisms. So what is the word ecology? It's just a fancy word that means how all of these organisms interact, how they relate, and how they relate with their environment. Okay? So here we have humans, we have trees, plants, we have birds. There's a lot more than that, but it's how we all interact with each other on this planet. That's what ecology is. It's a study of all that relationship, a study of the place where one lives. That's ecology. Now, we just mentioned in the world, in biology, there are two different main categories. They are living things, like trees and deer, rats, birds, and we have cougars and bears. All of these things are living organisms, and you could also put humans up there. We're all living things. They're called biotic factors. And they influence each other. I mean, these things depend on these things, which depends on these things to live. The abiotic, we just put an A in front of it, those are the things like air and wind and light and water and soil. Those are the things that we need to live. That all things need to live. They're called abiotic factors. So that's the difference between the two. The kinds of things that are found depend on the abiotic factors. So we look at this tree, as long as we have nice clear blue skies, warm temperatures, lots of water, it's going to grow. But if it gets really hot out there, there's no water, then it's going to die. So the climate, the abiotic factors determine what kind of things are going to live there. So the major components of this climate are these two main things right here. Latitude. Latitude. Now, latitude is where you live on this earth. If we were to live right at the equator, that's 0 degrees latitude. But as you go north of it, towards the pole, our numbers change. It's 30 degrees north, 60 degrees north. Until you get to the pole, it's 90 degrees. So, of course, people who live up here have to live differently than down there. They have to have more clothes. They have to have heat. Down here, you don't have to wear as many clothes. You can go around with shorts on and T-shirts all year long. But they have other things to worry about there. They have mosquitoes that carry malaria down here. Up here, you're not going to worry about bugs. And the further north, it's colder. It's not very many. However, I worked in the Arctic, and I'll tell you, the mosquitoes are almost as big as birds. They do come out in July. There's a lot of them. And they only got 1 month to start feeding. So, but as you get really north, then there's ice. You don't have those bugs. The other thing that controls climate is altitude. It's the height above sea level. If you look down here, you can hardly see it, but there is a city here. Okay? People living way down in here. But you notice up here, snow-capped, there's not many people or living things there because it's too cold. There's no vegetation. So the altitude also affects climate. It's colder. There's less food to eat. There's a lot more wind up there. Here we're a lot more protected, lots of water. So the latitude and the altitude are the two major components of climate. That's the important point. Now, if we were to take all the living things on the planet, we can divide them into groups. If we have one moose there, we call that an individual. Just like you, you're an individual person. If you have more than one, it's called a population, all the same kind. Where a population of human beings, there's a population of moose. And then the moose don't live by themselves. There's also going to be some wolves, there could be some birds, there's some beavers. All of these things live in the same area in the forest, and that's called a community. Like we live in the community of Bathurst. There are other living things in Bathurst. There's all those McDonald birds, those seagulls. There's all kinds of dogs and cats. There's plants. So that's the community. And then we have the next group called an ecosystem, which is all those living things, all those non-living things that make up the climate. And then we finally get into the biggest group here, the biome. And the biome is a major thing. What is the biome? That could be what we live in here. We are living in what's called a boreal forest. There's mixed trees here. We have hardwoods, softwood, and we have all the animals that live there, and we have a specific type of climate here. It's different than the biome that's down in the deserts. And they have different animals and different climate. And of course, the biosphere is just that area around the planet, very thin layer, where living things can actually survive. As you go away from there, there's no air, it's too cold. So that little thin layer around the earth is called the biosphere. So the important thing is here is to think that the ecosystem is the community of living things and the physical environment. So it's all the living things and what the climate is like around it. Now, part of the ecosystem, if you have two ecosystems, where they meet each other right at the boundary. It's not a black and white. It changes slowly. Think about it. If you have land here and you have water, well, in between there, where they meet, those are wetlands, marshes. Okay? There's still land in there, but it's very wet and boggy. There's a lot more animals and species living in those areas than in the other areas. And those areas are called ecotones. So the area between two ecosystems is a transition area. Call it ecotone. And that's where the greatest biodiversity occurs. That's where the greatest number of different things happening. You can't see it there, but here is one, this animal right here. It's kind of bleary. It's in a place called the Everglades. Little wetlands down there. The crocodile. I don't know if any of you have seen the show on TV, Swamp People. They go around in their boats and they're shooting alligators, right? Well, the crocodile is an actual saltwater animal that comes into these wetlands, these marshes. So most wetlands are ecotones because they're at the border, the transition between land and ocean. And finally, just looking at what biodiversity is, it refers to the variety. Variety means all the different things that we have of life on Earth. And we have two types of it. There's terrestrial and marine. What's terrestrial? Terrestrial is land. So what is the biodiversity on land? And marine is water, oceans. So the greatest diversity on land is near the equator, the Amazon. Thousands of species of birds and animals and trees there, more than anywhere else. The tropical forest covers only 10% of the planet, but it has over 90% of the world's species. Over 90% of the living things that live on Earth live near the equator. And then the marine biodiversity is highest along the coast, along the edges of the continents. And these dots here are what's called hotspots. Here is the greatest marine biodiversity on the planet. It is on the western shore here. You'll see that along from BC down to Mexico, there's the Galapagos Islands here, where Charles Darwin went, and all the way along the western shore of South America. There's more different types of marine animals along here than anywhere else on the planet. And these are all these other hotspots scattered around as well. So biodiversity tends to cluster in hotspots. It means that it's not evenly distributed. They tend to go into specific areas that have the best climate and the best food for them. And rainforest, you can see here on the land. I've seen those down in the Caribbean. If you go to places like down in Jamaica and places like that, they have rainforests. It means that when you go inside them, just walk, it's wet. It's always moisture dropping. It's not like it's pouring rain, but it's humid as heck. And the plants grow very large. They have flowers that are bigger than me. So, just in summary, the greatest terrestrial biodiversity is near the equator, mainly in rainforest, tropical forest, and the greatest marine or ocean diversity is along the western Pacific, along coast in the western Pacific. So this comes to what we're going to do for an assignment. I'm going to forward a copy of this video to your pickup box, and these are questions that you'll see in the video. And also you'll see a pickup thing called Science for Assignment for Ecosystems. And there you have the questions like define the term ecosystems. You can get it right from the notes. The difference between biotic and abiotic. And then you want to go the order from the biggest to the smallest, which is the biggest you think between community, ecosystem, biome, and population. So you start with the biggest and write it down to the smallest. And there is a little video. I'm going to show it to you. It's a very short one, I think. If not, I'll send you the link. So I'm just going to stop the video because I can't play within it, and I'll click onto that.